Welcome to The Explainer. We're all about breaking down the big, complex topics by going straight to the source material. All right, today we're tackling a real head-scratcher, a paradox deep in the heart of Texas. You've got these major cities, right? They're absolutely booming, people moving in, huge companies setting up shop. And yet, they're staring down a financial cliff. So how on earth can some of America's fastest-growing cities be heading straight for insolvency? Let's get into it. So the story you probably hear is all about the Texas miracle, right? I mean, you see the headlines. A huge state budget surplus, a brand new stock exchange coming to Dallas. It's this economic powerhouse pulling in people from everywhere. But if you peel back that layer, the reality for the cities at the very heart of this boom, we're talking Houston, Dallas, it's a completely different story. It's a story of mounting financial pressure. We're looking at huge looming budget deficits and a serious strain on the public services that, people actually rely on every day. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of how this is happening. The root of the issue is a set of constitutional amendments that are creating what a lot of analysts are calling a fiscal straitjacket. And that's a perfect way to put it. Imagine a set of rules designed to tie a city's hands, making it almost impossible for them to manage their own finances. And the very first move is to put a major squeeze on their single most important source of money. So, let's talk about property taxes. For pretty much any city, this is the absolute bedrock of their funding. It's the money that pays the salaries of the police and firefighters who respond when you have an emergency. It's what pays for the crews that patch up the potholes on your street, and it funds the massive, often invisible, infrastructure that keeps your city from flooding. Basically, it's the lifeblood for all those essential services we kind of take for granted. And this is exactly where that squeeze really starts to tighten. We're not talking about little trims here and there. The new state rules are basically taking a hatchet to the very tax base that cities need to survive. So let's break down a couple of the key amendments that are making this happen. Okay, first up, there's a huge hike in what's called the homestead exemption. What this does is raise the amount of your home's value that's completely off limits for school property taxes, all the way up to $140,000. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a fantastic tax break for homeowners, right? But the catch is, it yanks billions and billions of dollars in property value right out of the pool of money that cities also need to tax to function. And it doesn't stop there. At the same time, another amendment is blowing up the tax exemption for business inventory. We're talking about all the stuff a business has on hand, equipment, products on the shelves, you name it. That exemption just skyrocketed. And just like that, another massive piece of the tax base for cities and counties, poof, it's gone. And here's the kicker. This is the part that's absolutely crucial. The state has a system set up to pay back school districts for the money they lose from these new exemptions. They basically make them whole. But what about the cities and counties? Nope, nothing. They get no safety net. They're just left high and dry, forced to figure out how to plug this giant hole that the state just blew in their budget. All right, so if your main source of income is getting choked off, you'd think, okay, I'll just find another way to make money, right? Well, that's the thing. These amendments are cleverly designed to lock all the emergency exits. They're sealing off any other path a city might take to raise funds.
And this whole squeeze couldn't be happening at a worse time. Seriously. You have these cities exploding in population. That means you need more of everything. More police on the streets, more fire stations, more pressure on roads and water pipes that are already getting old. Then you throw in the skyrocketing costs for things like hurricane recovery and flood insurance in Texas, of all places. It's a perfect storm for a financial meltdown.
And this right here, this is the trap. You see, other propositions are what we can call preemptive bans. They're literally changing the state constitution to say you can never, ever tax these things. We're talking about major sources of revenue, like a tax on capital gains from investments or on huge inheritances. So think about that. Just as the city's main financial pipeline is being squeezed shut, the state is going around and welding all the emergency valves shut, forever. So what happens next when the money's gone and there's nowhere else to get it? Well, you enter a really dangerous cycle. Some call it the austerity doom loop. And it works like this. Step 1, the state cuts off the city's money. Step 2, the city has no choice but to start cutting services. Maybe the parks don't get mowed as often, the response time for road repairs gets longer, or worse, they have to start thinking about cutting police and fire department budgets. So then, step 3, the quality of life in the city starts to dip, and it becomes a less attractive place to live and invest. Which leads to step 4, property values stop growing or maybe even start to fall, which means the city's tax revenue shrinks even more. And boom, you're right back at the beginning of the spiral, only worse off.
And look, this isn't just some academic theory. This is real. You're looking at a quote from the City of Houston's own budget forecast. They are pointing directly at these state-imposed caps and exemptions as a huge reason for their budget crisis. They're basically sounding the alarm, saying, hey, we see this doom loop coming for us.
So you have to ask yourself, if the goal isn't just to cut taxes, what's the real end game here? Why put the state's biggest economic engines in this kind of fiscal straitjacket? Well, according to many analysts, it all boils down to one word: control. You see, when a city is financially weak and struggling, it becomes a perfect target for something called state preemption. And that's basically a fancy term for the state government having the power to just step in and say, nope, your local laws don't matter, we're in charge now. By putting cities in this financial bind, the state creates the perfect excuse to step in and take over. They have a whole toolkit for this: new laws that centralize power, even the threat of financial receivership, which is exactly what it sounds like. The state literally takes control of the city's checkbook. But no matter which tool they use, the result is the same. Power gets stripped away from the mayors and city councils that you elect locally and handed over to officials in Austin appointed by the state. And that really brings us to the final and maybe most important question. This whole situation goes way beyond just budgets and tax policy. It's about something much more fundamental: the future of local democracy. Because you have to ask, if a city can't even control its own money, can its citizens really control their own future?